Brilliant. Okay, so my title is Big Batch Brew in a Bag, which I said without stutter. Right, this is kind of the inaugural presentation. This one's a little bit big as a presentation for this format, but you know, you have all your entire life to make your triple award-winning debut album in 12 months to get the second one out. Whoever's coming after me, don't put this much effort in. And so without further ado, this is just what I do. It's not even necessarily a good idea, but it's a little bit entertaining. And there is a little bit of research in it and a couple of weird findings, which is worth sharing. So off we go. Okay, so everyone's seeing this with just the screen and no notes?
Yep, you're good.
Right, okay, yeah. Like I said, only thing better than 20 liters of top class brew is 50 liters of it, but you'll need a lot of physio. So the main thing is that scaling up your brew length by brew in a bag is quite cost effective by comparison with scaling up your 3-vessel system or your all-in-one. And if you're brewing infrequently, as I was, it can make sense because the large batches will span several months and not really too effective. You have to do a lot of competitions. So all in all, that big kettle on the left, including pump, trolley, all the hoses and lines and stuff, set me back just under 400 quid, which is kind of a lot of brew kit for the capacity. So, right, what's big batch brew in a bag and what's normal batch brew in a bag? I made the term, I have to struggle to pronounce it, so I'm saying that if you can't lift it, you're doing big batch. And bear in mind, it's not a 5-second lift. There can be moments when you have to hold the bag for like a minute, 2 minutes. So if that's 8 kilos, you can just about do it. If it's 15 kilos, you can't do it. So 8 kilos, you're probably still regular batch. 15, you're definitely big batch. Right, arbitrary. So let's go on. Yeah, and let's talk about the dangers, right? Normally, brew in a bag is billed as being simple, cheap, accessible, kind of like no frills approach to brewing that still gets you the same quality. And scaling it up has its benefits, as we mentioned them, but your accidents increase, slips, falls, splashes, and hot water. If you're brewing bigger, you now have like 2 or 3 times much hot liquid and, you know, quite a lot more strain on your personal body and the equipment you're using. Right, so here's the history of it. Why did it go down this route? So this is going back a few years and your options for upgrades weren't as numerous as they are now. But I was brewing a lot less and I was planning some upgrades and I had some issues at the time where I was fed up with plastic. So I got a 65-liter conical. And that meant it took 2 back-to-back brews with the urn on your far right just to fill it. And a club member in London was selling a 100-liter catering urn. Now, who needs a 100-liter catering urn? Maybe, you know, maybe Ford out in Dagenham did, which is probably where you got them. And, you know, this probably wasn't the best planned one. I advise people when they're doing their planning to do it a lot differently now. But the first choice was the fermenter and the second one was the actual brew house. And this kind of worked for a bit. But also consider that a lot of the slides after this are going to show you outdoor shots. Much of the lessons I perfected here were done in a small split level 1-bedroom apartment in London. So it's, I'm that kind of crazy Irish brewer. So on to the next slide. So yeah, can you lift it? Like I mentioned, 8 kilos was about my personal limit for lifting a hot, wet bag of grain unaided. And you'll still need some help, but you're not relying on anything to take the load. For that 100-liter setup, you're going to need 10 to 11 kilos of grain just to get you into the 104x gravity area, assuming 65 to 75% brewhouse efficiency. And that's with the kettle more or less maxed. So in order to do this, you're going to need a load-bearing point above the kettle in order to secure a strap or a cord. So you'll also want to tie off the line at times so you can leave it unattended to drip drain, or you can do other brew stuff. The tying it off isn't as big an issue as having a vertical load point. And So some of the options I've used all of these, right? So yeah, stairwell banister is pretty good. An upstairs radiator, very secure. Don't be worried about them. I've used a toilet, crossbeam in a shed, upstairs window, and I've never used a purpose-built skyhook or cleat because I've never had one of those. I'm not that kind of guy. And you can maybe get engine hoists for the DIY inclined, but I used what I had available to me. I didn't want to spend more on hoisting points than I did in an actual brew kit. But in my experience, the upstairs window has always been the best and has some other benefits. Your hoist clearance, this may be something you're not thinking about, especially if you're doing it in a garden shed. I can't do this in my current garden shed. I was just about able to do it in the last house, but you're going to need your load bearing point will need to be about 2.5 meters above the ground. Your kettle has some height, your bag is bigger, it's going to elongate. You're actually going to run out of cord before the bag clears, before it actually clears the actual wort. So otherwise you'll actually have to manually lift it with your own hands. This means that you can't use some standard easy options for brewing a bag hoist. Like an A-frame ladder is very popular with brewing a bag people. Step ladders or stacking furniture, like bear in mind the safety aspect. The other thing though is if you can't get a vertical lift point, a 75-degree angle is okay if you use like a bag rest, like just get one of your oven racks. So you lift it up, then use a little bit of wiggle room to squeeze the rack above the kettle, plonk the bag on it, and you can kind of take a break. And speaking of that point, here's a great 75-degree lifting, 1, 2, 3 shots of the same stuff going on side by side. So in left bag in situ, you can see the sky hook, and all that yellow line is actually just load bearing stuff. Middle shot, you can see the red strap introduced. This is nothing fancy here. There's no pulleys in action. So this was hard to lift. You can see I was taking a break, and I've wrapped the strap about 3 to 5 times around the handle of the flatbed to secure it. So I could get a picture and probably take a bit of a break. And then the third shot is sometime after I've lifted it, you can see I've almost completely run out of strap. So there's almost no play left in that line. In order to clear the bag above it, it's resting on the back on the oven rack, and you can see I've also actually drained some of the wort into a fermenter I had as well. So that's a 75-degree lift-in operation. I did that for about a year. All right, so the bags. I got a dedicated brew in a bag from the English outfit. It's lasted me an awful lot, so showing a lot of ladders and damage into it, so it's due a replacement soon. Forget about any cheap bags. You can see like mash bags, drawstrings in them. Just forget about those. That's just drama. And I'd probably skip anything from AliExpress, eBay. Look at the premium brand stuff. Wills or Brew are apparently the best, and the brew bag in the US, they're also good, a bit more expensive, and their delivery options are okay to here. So they might even get under the radar in terms of in terms of like delivery and customs. Right, the bag weight, I always factor in that whatever you're mashing with in terms of grain, like 10 kilos, factor it in weighing 3 times as much when you try to lift it out of the kettle. So 10 kilos sounds like, yeah, okay, that's a dumbbell. 30 kilos one-handed, not so much. So all that stress is going into your arms or pulley. And also, just when you get it to clear and it starts to drain, the drain bag's still going to hold a lot of water, even as it starts to drain out properly, as you're talking half a liter per kilo or so. So just don't underestimate how hard this is. If you don't have a plan for lifting it out, you can be kind of stuck. Right. Another warning, don't use kettle thermowells. These can be problematic in brewing a bag when you can be gentle with the bag when you're lifting it. There's no gentle lifts. They're basically a spike that's going to rip your bag in two, spill it into your hot water and splash you, and then suddenly you're on your way to A&E. Now, here's my trick. So if you're trying to lift 30 kilos, even if you're doing it through a pulley, you're still lifting 30 kilos. So here's what we learned when I went whitewater safety and rescue training in a previous hobby. If you can arrange pulleys like so, you can find better examples of this on the internet. It means that the coil is going to go through a series of pulleys multiple times. And in four-way mechanical advantage, which is what's pictured, that means for every centimeter the bag lifts, I'm pulling 4. So I've reduced the weight by 4. And it's the parts for this are very cheap. You may recognize the cord I get from that shows up in Lidl, the carabiners that show up in Lidl, and the pulleys I got off eBay. This was not an expensive proposition. And on the right, you can see that I've basically tied this off my hands. This is a 12 kilo grist. Doesn't hurt my hands, and I can freely take a photo with the other. So there's not much drama in lifting this, and that can be a lot more efficient. One thing to be careful of is watch it when this cord starts to cross itself. It creates resistance that just makes you do a lot more work. All right, power. Okay, you've got a 100-liter kettle. You will struggle to make this work with one element. So you're going to need 2 elements going into it, whether the kettle supports it. Mine does. It has 3 elements, 3 different single-phase power feeds. You may need a drop-in element. You may need a rim setup. You need any number of different things to actually get the power to work. Even at that, a single element will take me 2.5 hours to get to strike temperature, and 1 more to hit the boil. So, and you also need power for things like pumps and drills. And be wary of what it's actually getting plugged into in your house, like if there's washing machines going or anything like that. So it's power management's a little bit difficult to do domestically unless you get a purpose-built, you get an electrician in to kind of do all the work properly. I find timer plugs are fantastic for doing the heating up to strike. You can set them overnight and then mash in the morning. And if you get your brew day done before the house is up, then nobody starts plugging in all kinds of crazy stuff into the socket, into the circuits that you're drawing major power off of. Another thing is it would be nice if you can automate this, but really that's a job for rims and herms because you need to agitate what's in the kettle in order to get reliable temperature management. I've seen some people talk about sous vide immersion elements like the ANOVA controller. They may have sufficient agitation built into them to be effective here, but that's an expensive unit. That increases my kettle cost by 25%. So it depends on whether you want to be cheap or okay with it. Another option is steam condensers. With a steam condenser, you keep the lid on and your power requirements can go down a lot. Maybe not enough, but I think it could work quite well to just take everything off of one circuit. Okay, cooling big batches there's an immersion coil, and there's me with lots of time to take photos of said immersion coil draining water in. It is a pain in the ass, and that day was freezing. So you're going to need to think of alternatives to an immersion coil when you're cooling down these big batches. I could save probably 60 to 90 minutes off the brew day if I can get this counter plate chiller straight into the FE. It would be amazing. And if cooling the big batches isn't a thing for you, you can just go total farmhouse and pitch everything at 40 degrees Celsius. So that can be, you can have your Kveik Hefeweizen or your Kveik Best Bitter or your Kveik Double IPA or your Kveik Farmhouse Ale. But everything, you're only worrying about dropping it from 100 to 80 and then 80 to 40, which is a lot quicker. The 40 down to 17 is particularly hard. Okay, we're going to talk about something that's a little bit more technical and I think a little bit more interesting. One of the things you're going to see, you probably see it already anyway in Brew in a Bag, but I never really noticed it until I went big. If you take a hydrometer or refractometer reading from the top of the wort, you get a panic attack as you realize that your export porter has a post mash of 1025. and you're going, what the hell is going on? Then you take it off the bottom reading and it's 1067. Whatever's going on here, I don't understand the physics or chemistry. The extract tends to go out from the bag down at the bottom. And it means that you can't rely on any readings of the hydrometer until you have lifted the bag, which will equalize it, or you equalize it another way. When I had a pump, I could equalize it with the pump. Nowadays, if I'm a little bit concerned about my mash and whether I need to dip into the DME drawer, I'll just get a jug and start transferring from the bottom to the top until bottom and top start to measure the same. But if you're doing it for this for the first time, it can be a big panic. But I would typically get differences between top and bottom readings about 30 points. And here is another trick. Regular sized brew in a batch people will typically point that a bag squeeze is a very good way to boost your efficiency. And when you got a huge bag, I just could not be asked with this. But I tried on my last brew, which is not this one. And I noticed that after a reasonably aggressive squeeze, I got like 2 centimeters more liquor, like about 5% more liquor in total, but also my gravity jumped by about 10%. So that's like a 14% increase post mash. Now, admittedly, if I left that bag drip drain into the pot, I'd see a lot of those benefits as well. But a little bit of exploration here, maybe a little bit of science, that a larger volume of mash may retain more higher gravity wort towards the center that won't drain as well. It's you could solve this with recirculation. You could solve this with a dunk sparge or some kind of sparge, but there are benefits to retaining some of the smaller batch stuff. The big bag isn't going to drain itself. If you're doing this, of course, wear proper gloves. Don't do it barehanded like I do. All right, steam and condensation. This isn't really a big batch issue. This is a standard problem with anyone brewing at this scale. You're going to shove out about 7 liters into the brew space in an hour. That's going to cause problems. At minimum, it might cause everything to be really slippery and unsafe. Few solutions to this. Some people put in an extractor hood. The steam condenser that I mentioned will get rid of most of the problem. I brew outside, which solves this problem from wrecking the house. It introduces other problems, but be aware of it. When you do it indoors, you're not going to make a lot of friends. You're going to have a lot of fights with special people in your life. All right, long dough in. This is another technical issue. I might take some questions on this. I know we'll take questions towards the end simply because it just needs to fly through it. What I noticed was a very unusual problem when I started to try and dial in my mash temperature a little bit more accurately instead of being a bit loose about it, is that I have a lot more grain to mash in with. It's taking a while, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, because I'm trying to be careful and try not to do dough balls with it. And I was getting like maybe 55 to 60% attenuation in the final beer. And it's hit quite a few beers, and it's been a bit of a problem. I managed to solve it sometimes and not solve it the other times. A little bit of research is, if you're striking high and mashing in slow, your recipe is assuming that your strike temperature and your grist will equalize quickly at what you call your mash temperature for your first infusion. If it's taking like 15 to 20 minutes to mash this in, half that grist is actually in effect mashing in at like 70 degrees, 71 degrees. And that full conversion can often happen in as little as 20 minutes. But at 70 C or higher, the enzymes responsible for fermentability, they're going to be dead. You're going to be going, their half-life is like measured in seconds. Even if you've got a lot of them, it means that the enzymes that give you less fermentable sugars, long chain sugars, they're more survivable at high temperatures. They'll actually do most of the conversion. So yeah, I was having stuck fermentations that I couldn't actually sort out. Yeah. Right. And yeah, so what I did here, I'll quickly fly through these. I doughed in, I What I normally do is I target a lower mash temperature. That sorts things out for me of those options, but rims, sous vide, etc. is probably a better way of doing it. Or you're going to step mash. And as a last result, there's always glucoamylase, which I've used too much. Right, and here's we're getting to the end anyway. So you haven't thought through the fact that your brew space doesn't have all the things you need, whether that's power, hoist, ventilation, etc. That's not a problem. You just move the mash. So happy honking, Mash Daisy. We've got this truck platform, one of the best investments I ever did. It is rated for 150 kilos, and I've loaded it with very close to that. So the kettle itself is about 15, the mash is about 12 to 15, and there's about 70 to 80 liters of liquor in it. So we're already at 100 kilos before we do anything. And I would wheel this around the house, into the yard, wherever the power was, wherever the cooling was, wherever the hoist was. I'm starting to do this less and less, but it's a very useful tool. But with the safety issues I'm seeing, I kind of want to not have to deal with one of those casters coming off as I'm moving it somewhere pretty sensitive. But it is an option, and it's kind of got me through a lot of my brew history with this kettle. And so we're at the end of the presentation. And does anyone have any questions? And there's pictures of my nice low-tech transfers.